Thanks for joining me for another episode of Trip Report. On today's episode, I'm going to discuss my 7th ayahuasca experience, which was hands down the most challenging to date, and really just felt like a continuation of that 6-gram penis envy trip where I was convinced that I had died. 2.5 years passed since that mushroom trip, and I really didn't feel any calling to psychedelics. I was downright terrified to be back in that headspace that I got into on the mushroom trip. I very much had the message repeating in my head that I didn't belong in that realm and that I wasn't welcome there. Over the 2.5 years that passed, I microdosed LSD a handful of times, but it was mostly subperceptual, pleasant experiences. Finally, I started to feel the calling to defragment the old hard drive. We were continuing through the COVID nonsense, the masks, the travel restrictions, and all the controversy surrounding the shot. I really felt like it was time that I needed another reset. Still terrified of that mushroom realm, I figured I would give ayahuasca another go. There was a ceremony scheduled for the week after my birthday, so I figured I would just make that a gift to myself. I got myself signed up and I was headed to the mountains for another weekend with Mother Ayahuasca. This was back in early July, so a fairly recent experience. I was going through my journal and the pre-ceremony journal entry that I had stated, "Here we are again, and definitely not without some nerves. I really feel like structural integration unlocked something in me, and I can't tell if it's good or it's bad, but something feels off. It's been one hell of a year, the longest bout of unemployment yet. I'm so blessed to have the VA benefits that were able to carry me through that lull in employment without any worry. I learned a lot about the body in massage therapy school, and I'm excited to see how I can internalize some of the messages I have received, hoping to continue my healing journey mentally, physically, and spiritually. I'm open to whatever comes my way, and there's no growth without discomfort." The facilitators had finally purchased their own retreat center in the mountains, so they no longer had to keep finding various Airbnbs. This is my first time visiting the cabin, and I wrote, "The new space is large and beautiful." One of the facilitators, who had been to all of my previous ceremonies, was absent for this trip to see some of his family overseas, and I was super bummed that he wasn't present. But there was a new facilitator who I had not yet met, so fingers crossed that she crushed it. As soon as I walked in the door, I was greeted with big hugs and smiles from the main facilitators. It was such a good feeling to be back more than 2.5 years later, and it truly felt like visiting family. The first word out of the main facilitator's mouth was, "The mother said that it's time to up your dose." I laughed and I said, "Well, let's do it." And that, I think, is what started to spark some of the nerves. She offered the pre-dose again in this ceremony, so it was just that pure ayahuasca vine. She handed me a cup that was literally filled to the brim, to the point where I had to be careful not to spill any. I glanced to my left, and the gentleman was a little bit smaller than me, but comparable in size. I looked at his cup, and I could only see the inside rim, so I'm guessing the cup was probably only about half full. And then I looked to my right, and that guy was, a straight-up bodybuilder, jacked. And I glanced at his cup, and again, I couldn't see the level of the liquid, so it was likely only halfway up the cup. So that kicked the nerves a little bit higher for me because, I had one guy about comparable to my size, another guy way bigger, and I had a significantly higher dose than both of them. So we kicked back that pre-dose, and it was rough. I shuddered, I sipped some water to get it down, and then I sipped some more to try to wash that flavor out of my mouth. And then I just sat there focusing on keeping it down. I had grabbed the journal and wrote down some questions that I was hopeful to answer. Number 1. Why am I so afraid of death? Not only was it something that would come up in the higher dose mushroom trips, but occasionally I would just get some anxiety thinking, so far, every time I go to bed, I wake up in the morning and I do it all over again. That's just what life is. But there's going to be a point in life that I don't wake back up and I am no longer part of this society that exists on Earth. Also, I'm used to having all of my friends, family, and loved ones in my life, but there's going to come a day that all of them, one by one, depart my reality on this earth until I myself also cease to exist. It was just a weird thought process that would occasionally hit me and was definitely disconcerting to think about. Question 2, what caused the lupus and can we fix it? Again, this one had come up many times previously in various ceremonies, but I had recently started seeing an NAET practitioner who claimed that she could clear allergies and all sorts of other ailments energetically. She did some very interesting stuff that seemed like magic, which made me wonder if disease could just be some frequency that's out of alignment in the body, and maybe ayahuasca was capable of restoring that flawed frequency or energy and clearing the body of it. Question 3 was, should I take the contract job? So at this point, like I said, I was on unemployment. I had my certification as a massage therapist, and I liked the idea of getting paid to help others. There were some decent paying jobs available, but the contract work is just so easy for what it pays. But the disadvantage is that it doesn't help anyone other than, the military industrial complex. So it certainly isn't work that fulfilled my soul, and it doesn't pay awesomely. So I had to question if I was voluntarily putting myself into a dead end job when I could just, not take the contract job when it started back up and start focusing my attention on working toward a more lucrative career in the future that helps others. Question 4 was, is my riding BMX coming to an end? So riding BMX was such a big part of my life for so many years. I really think that it was a lifesaver while navigating adolescence. It was the first sport that I actually enjoyed, and if I hadn't found something physical at that time and just continued to play video games, read comic books, etc., I may have never lost the weight that was so taxing on my mental health. After reading the book Stealing Fire, which is all about the flow state, I really think that being in the flow state, riding skate parks, dirt jumps, etc., had an overwhelmingly positive impact on my mental health. Over the past couple years, less and less friends are riding, the injuries hurt more, it takes longer to heal, and although I still very much enjoy getting everyone together for a hang, I was questioning how much longer this activity of riding could be a reality. I mean, I know a few guys that are still killing it in their 40s, but they're few and far between, and I just had to ask myself, is it time to lay this hobby to rest? Question 5 was, what is the source of my rhomboid pain? So over the past year in massage therapy school, I had heard many people bring up the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and another one called Healing Back Pain, both of which discuss the theory that the majority of back pain is not actually a physical issue, rather it's psychosomatic and often related to trauma. Throughout the program, I constantly had issues in my upper back between the shoulder blades, and I had to wonder if it might be trauma related. So it was a question I wanted to take into the ayahuasca realm with me. I also wrote that I wanted to send healing to my dog Bullet. He was at this point slowing down and not really enjoying the walks the way that he used to. And he had also was kind of skipping meals pretty regularly. I wanted to send healing to my brother because he still kind of seemed like he was in a stuck place in life. To my cousin because she was dealing with some weird liver issues at the time. So I had her in the prayers and the thoughts. To my aunt, who had recently popped up randomly in a float tank session, and I was completely sober, and I hadn't talked to her in years. So I was just kind of hoping everything was good with her and that I would just send the healing in case she needed it, because it was so odd that she popped up out of nowhere. And then finally to my buddy Anthony, who also seemed like he was kind of at a stuck place at this time frame that we were all laid off from work. I closed the journal, and it was about time to start the ceremony. She handed out the cups of the ayahuasca, and again, mine completely filled to the brim. I glanced to my left, glanced to my right again, and those guys again, not even close to what my dose was. So I thought, fingers crossed, I hope this goes well. First off, I will never drink ayahuasca without fasting ever again. As I had mentioned in the previous podcasts, I had always fasted throughout the entire weekend. I think it was beneficial to the experience, but also on the body overall to undergo a 72-hour water fast. I had heard others say that having a morning meal allows the body to have more energy and journey deeper during the ceremony, so I figured I would give it a go this time. That morning I had oatmeal and fruit for breakfast, and I didn't eat anything after. As soon as the ceremony started, I was feeling bloated, gassy, and uncomfortable. We began with a silent meditation. Usually nothing happens for me until the music starts, but I was already dropping deep into the other realm in the silence. It started as the typical DMT visions. I started going through what felt like a life review, seeing the past few years, all of the military stuff, high school, adolescence, childhood, and then the visions begin to get very strange, yet familiar. And I realized that they looked like the visions that I had on that edible cannabis mushroom mesmerica experience that I had talked about in a previous podcast, where I had said that those visions were the dreams that I had as an infant before I could dream in earth visuals. From there, the visions changed again to something I had never experienced before, and that bizarre language that I mentioned on the 4-gram psilocybin trip came back into my mind. It had been years since I encountered this language, but it began to flood my mind again, and the message that I got was that this is how I heard language in the womb, and that the visions that I was seeing were those that I saw in the womb before I was born and my eyes and brain were able to perceive this reality. Things started getting dark again, and I got the message that you were told that you don't belong here by the mushroom. You think you can just ignore them and get here with ayahuasca? It doesn't work that way. And slowly, all of who I am on this earth just began to fade. I was forgetting names of loved ones, faces, voices, everything. It was absolutely terrifying. I had to do whatever possible to not forget all of this. I opened my eyes and got into the kneeling position. Like, the nausea was kicking so hard, especially from that breakfast and everything else. And I thought, if I can just puke, maybe I'll feel better. So while kneeling, I leaned over the bucket, just painfully dry heaving a handful of times. I kicked my legs back so I was like lying face down over the bucket, and I just couldn't get anything out. So I came back up to the kneeling position. I looked around the room. My eyelids were so heavy I could barely keep them open. And with the red light illuminating everyone's faces, the DMT rapidly distorting everything I saw, it looked like I was surrounded by demons. Realizing I couldn't puke, I just laid back down again. Fighting to hold on to who I am, I bumped into childhood. I saw what was just like this sad, depressed child that I was. I mean, elementary school was rough. I didn't fit in. Sports were rough. I wasn't good at them. It just killed my self-esteem. Riding BMX, likely that flow state just seemed to snap me out of it. I mean, through the end of middle school and coming into high school, everything was good. I mean, I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of fun. I was still creative. It really seemed to snap me out of that funk that I went through in my pre-teenage years. But what I realized was that boot camp seemed to bring it all right back to the surface. And when it resurfaced, I just drowned it out with alcohol instead of fixing it. And then, Iraq didn't help the equation either. I mean, no one should have to see the horrors of war. When you see a movie about war, there's no emotion attached to it because you're watching it on a screen and you know deep down that it's fiction, that it's portrayed by actors, that there's a screenplay and everything else. But when you're there and you're hearing and seeing explosions with your teeth rattling in your skull and you lose track of how many severely wounded and dead bodies you've seen, I mean, that shit hits different. And then it was like the divorce didn't help the situation either. I mean, it truly crushes your soul when your best friend, the one that you trust more than anyone else in this world, the person who you plan to spend the rest of your life with, abandons you. The message then evolved and basically told me I can no longer have fun or experience joy in this world, that I was broken. And it told me that psychedelics were what got me here. They essentially red pill pulled me out of the matrix so that I can no longer experience the joy of being a human being on Earth. All of this was it was so damn heavy. While I was going through the thought processes, I was on a constant loop of laying to kneeling to bending over the bucket to dry heaving, back to kneeling, back to laying down. I mean, I wish I could have seen it on camera because I had to have looked like a crazy person. I mean, dozens of times just cycling through those positions, but I still couldn't purge. It was just painful dry heaving. Finally, I laid there just groaning and making strange noises on every exhale. I mean, I don't know if I was trying to purge something audibly, but I heard someone at some point chuckle at the noises that I was making, and then someone else around me attempt to duplicate them, which made me laugh. But I felt so bad afterwards for all of the noise that I had been making during the ceremony. I mean, up until this one, I was always able to keep it together and not burden others with my processing. I thought back to my brain being broken and the message that it was because of psychedelic usage, but I rationalized, no, that can't be the case because, all of that enjoying the things in life really stopped following the Iraq deployment, long before finding the plant medicine. So it wasn't the psychedelics that took that from me. Regardless, I realized that I was continuing to fade away to before the point of existence, and that this ayahuasca ceremony was the last thing that I would do as Sean on this earth. I was so bummed for my lady, my family, all of my friends to have to mourn my death, my dogs to be left without me. I continued to fight to stay here, but it just felt like a battle I couldn't win. I thought, if there's any way I can get beyond this, I'm done. I'm out. No more psychedelics. I've re-examined my entire life. There is no reason to be back in here. If I get out of this, I'll thank the facilitators for their work and they can keep the costs for both nights, but I'm going to hop in the car, head home, and my work with plant medicine is done. I continued the dry heaving loop for what seemed like another 30 minutes. So taxing, so stressful, uncomfortable, terrifying. And at some point, the cup wore off enough and I realized, oh shit, maybe I'm not dying. So I continued to solidify in my mind, thinking, cool, but we're done here. Just ride the ceremony out. You learn through this that you need to start enjoying life again and that you no longer need psychedelics to do so. It's not worth trying them ever again because you hate being in this feeling like you've died realm so much that it's not worth coming in to learn any lessons knowing that this is a potential consequence. The facilitator makes the announcement that she's going to offer the second cup. I thought, nope, no way. And I got up to go to the bathroom to pee and see if maybe I could pull off a back-end purge to get rid of the gas and bloating. I've never had such a body load from ayahuasca. I felt like I was hammered drunk trying to stumble to the bathroom. I pulled off a number 1, no dice in the number 2, but I definitely cleared enough air to reduce some of the discomfort in the stomach. I stumbled back to the ceremony and I saw that everyone else had already taken their second cup, and God only knows why I sat down in front of the facilitator. She asked how I was doing and I replied, I found out what's wrong, but it's time to let it go. She nodded, she poured me another heavy second cup. I choked that down and went back to the mat. Immediately, I went so much quicker and so much deeper into that realm that I was convinced that I had died. The message came through saying, you had your chance. You asked to be saved. You learned your lesson. You were given the opportunity to resume your life, but you ignored it. You drank the second cup, and there's no coming back from this one. My eyelids got so heavy that even when I tried to open them to make sure I was still a body on this earth, I could only hold them open for a split second to see this distorted red room around me before they would just involuntarily slam shut again. The loop continued, saying that all you had to do was love yourself and love others, but now you don't get the chance because you're dead. It was so scary. It was so sad. I would just fight to keep my eyes open to prove that I wasn't dead. Again, just a split second of this creepy red world, and then back to the visions of the other side with the messages of all you had to do was love yourself and love others, but now you don't get to do that because you're dead. I could still hear the music, but it wasn't at all comforting. It was just reminding me that this was the soundtrack of eternity, that this was all I could listen to in this hellscape forever. While I went through this loop, I felt like the discomfort was just burrowing into every nook and cranny of this body where trauma could be hiding. I got back into the loop of struggling to get to the bucket only to dry heave and then ultimately lay down again unsuccessful. And I felt like this loop went on for hours. So like I said, it was just this soundtrack in the background and this constant loop for what I knew was hell of just feeling uncomfortable, getting up, getting to the bucket, trying to purge, dry heaving, nothing coming out, giving up, and retiring back to that laying down position. And what I thought was, this is hell. Just for eternity, I will be doing this loop of attempting to purge, but I will never be able to get it out. So it was just so uncomfortable and just so horrific. Like I said, I felt like it went on for hours and it was just absolutely miserable. And I was convinced that there was no way out. Finally, the facilitator said to sip some water, which she usually does near the end of the ceremony. And it kind of shocked me to hear that. And I thought, maybe time is moving forward. And because it broke the loop with her speaking instead of performing music, I thought, maybe this will wear off. I was able to get my eyes open and I took a quick sip of water and I thought, well, maybe if I get outside, that can help me. So I got up, I stumbled to the courtyard, and I sat at the table that was outside. I looked up at the stars, but as soon as I would try to focus on the sky, it would just get very uncomfortable and I'd have to close my eyes again. I mean, at this point, I don't think I could hold my eyes open for more than maybe 10 seconds at a time. The eyelids were still just super heavy. So another participant came out and sat down. He lit up a joint and asked if I smoke. I declined, and I said, I think I need to lay back down. So I stood up and I was completely lost. I couldn't remember which door I came out of, and I just walked to one where I could hear the music coming from. But the gentleman at the table, he was like, nope, that door's locked. Like, you need to go there. And he steered me in the right direction. And I found my way back to the mat. I laid down and my brain was bouncing back and forth between, thank God I'm finally grounding, and oh shit, maybe I'm not. I'm still dead. Finally, she called an end to the ceremony. At this point, I was able to keep my eyes open longer and could start to make sense of my surroundings. The ceremony was over, but I was still too exhausted to make it out to the car. So I just laid on my mat for probably 20 minutes listening to the playlist that they put on when the live music ends, and I finally got up to go to the bathroom. I finally got a little bit of that back end purge out, and while I was washing my hands, I glanced in the mirror, and I truly liked who I saw looking back at me. So clearly, throughout this whole process, I had let go of some of my dysmorphia situation. Somehow that eye-to-eye connection in the mirror unlocked my purge. I mean, it was a small one, but after so much painful dry heaving, it was so rewarding to just get a little bit of a purge out. I made my way back to the mat and I gathered my things and I headed to the car. I put on the new playlist that I had just put together and it sounded absolutely amazing. The stars of the mountain sky were unbelievable, and I cycled through my gratitude list in my head of everyone that I know in this life that I appreciate so much. I probably sent out way too many sketchy middle of the night love you texts to people, but again, I'm not ashamed. I figured if they came to mind, they deserved it. I send my significant other at least a dozen love you text messages per day, so why wouldn't I do that for the rest of the loved ones in my life? My lady was responding, which was nice, but it seemed a little odd since she would usually be asleep by then. I got through most of my new playlist and finally surrendered to sleep. In the morning, I wrote, I slept well and felt restored, but I'm on the fence about another ceremony tonight. Clearly, I haven't committed to letting go, which could be exactly what I need, but I ended on a high note and I don't want to risk coming out of the next one in a bad place or not coming out at all because my ego is correct and letting go means that this body dies. Oh, the dilemma. So I go through the share circle, and since the new retreat center is only about 45 minutes from my house, I figured I may as well head home and spend the afternoon with my lady and the dogs and think about whether or not I wanted to head back for the second night. I drove home feeling pretty good considering all that hell that I went through. I pulled up in the driveway and Toki was at the gate wagging his tail. I gave him some pets. I came inside. I gave the lady a big hug. She asked how it went, and I explained, how difficult the whole situation was. I asked her where Bullet was since it was odd that he hadn't greeted me, and she immediately broke down in tears. So apparently the reason she was answering my texts at 1 a.m. was because she spent all night with Bullet in the ER because I woke her up in the middle of the night gasping for air. He was still in the ER undergoing further testing. Long story short, there was a tumor in his throat that was closing off his airway, and he only had a few days at best remaining. Obviously, I called the facilitators and told them I'd be unable to join him that evening. Our game plan was to grab him from the vet and just give him one last day of cuddles before letting him go. Things took a huge turn for the worse that night, and he was barely hanging on the next morning when we woke up. From the moment I got these dogs, I always thought, I hope they pass of natural causes, and more than anything, I don't want to be the one that has to decide whether they live or die. Seeing him in that state of suffering that next morning, there was no question about what was the right thing to do. We had a vet come out to do the home euthanasia, and I'm so thankful that he headed straight over because he couldn't have gotten here soon enough. I think Bullet was only moments from death anyway, struggling to breathe, but he was given ketamine to relax, and after a few moments with him, the final med was administered, which let him pass. I joked, "Oh, you're getting ketamine, bud. I hear that's the good stuff." So I know, super sad ending to this story. However, I truly think the reason that I went through so much that night before regarding death was to prep me for the loss of Bullet. It was super hard for both of us to let him go, but I feel like that ayahuasca experience gave me the strength that I needed to be there for my lady through the process of him passing. I've already talked about how he came to both of us in the Ayahuasca experience in Joshua Tree months later, but he actually popped up at my next ayahuasca experience, which I will get into in one of the next few episodes. That being said, I'm so grateful to the facilitator for being so understanding and bringing back my mat and backpack that I left up there expecting to return Saturday night, but also for allowing me to reschedule my second ceremony for a later date. That one was a much more positive experience than this. So that wraps up this experience. While the 6-gram mushroom trip had me thinking I was stuck in a place of psychosis or some bizarre other realm, after drinking the second cup on this experience, I was truly convinced that I was dead. Like I said, I watched myself, I did the whole full life review, and then it felt like I continued to dissolve into what I was before I entered the womb and found myself into this world. So that was just a huge mind fuck to have this whole flashing before my eyes experience, because you often hear people with near-death experiences saying that's exactly what they experience. So I was just like, oh yeah, of course this is me dying, because I'm seeing my whole life and I'm going to the point before it. And then, like I said, as all of my thoughts and emotions and everything of what makes me me slowly faded away, I thought, okay, this is what death is. This is what everybody experiences when they die, and I'm done. So the mushroom trip was stressful, but this was so much worse in every single way. I mean, at least there wasn't as much physical discomfort on the mushroom trip, but the GI pain, the bloating, the constant loop of dry heaving, I mean, it really had me convinced that what I was experiencing was what hell really is. Not some fiery place, just an eternal loop of pain, regret, and suffering. Fortunately, I was finally able to put all of this to bed with my 5-MeO experience, and we'll dive into that on the next one. Until next time, thanks for listening. Love you guys.